Hey, Harry, not sure you're able to hear me through the Zoom.
Sorry, did the people on the Zoom call miss all of that? Are they good now?
No,
Yes.
All right, sorry. Yeah, I was just talking about the fact that we are going to use Kubernetes as a building block for the benefit of those on the Zoom call, and then extend that. So ever since Kubernetes was released, we've been working on further enhancing it. And so finally, 5 years later, we have the Anthos fabric that we've kind of been developing all along and been adding to these features. And you can see that where the position we are at now, it didn't happen overnight. It took 15 years to get here, another 5 years for Anthos to come up after Kubernetes. And we'll take you on to the root cause out to why we have developed Anthos. So if you look at the first generation of cloud applications, most of the effort was around infrastructure and migrations. Most of the effort was, okay, how are we going to virtualize this infrastructure? How are we going to use the infrastructure as a code? How are we going to containerize and bring these applications into the cloud in order to for resilience and security and basically bringing it up from the on-premises into cloud environments. That was our first effort. And now the next effort is, okay, now that we are on the cloud, how do we scale this? How do we add other attributes to it, like security and the ability to govern this and keep the operational effort to a minimal? So how do we get sustainable scale and value out of it? How do we, make this highly available and secure by default, etc. So these are the points on the right that we are trying to solve through Anthos. So if you look at the, if you treat each cloud as separately as from a strategic standpoint, each will be an island or a silo. So you plan and develop your application on AWS, you deploy it on AWS. Wow, you have your application running on AWS, right? Similarly, you do on GCP or Azure, and you have your application running on either one of those stacks, but they end up being silos. And this is a long-term problem with IT, because now all of a sudden you have to have people who are certified, who are knowledgeable in each one of these clouds in order to be able to run the applications on each one of these environments. So Anthos has been developed to solve this problem. What we are trying to do is make a common execution a DevOps layer called Anthos, and then you write your application once, containerize it, and then you should be able to run it on any runtime that's spread over either one of the public clouds or on-prem or edge device. So that's in theory how it should work. So let's see how does it do that. So why GCP? So what we are trying to do is make it most of an open platform where you can use APIs or UIs or whatever tooling that you like to prefer. There'll be a choice of 4 toolings that I'll show later on in this demonstration. In order to be able to spread it across any one of the public clouds or on-prem or edge devices, and you should be able to achieve consistency, security, and connectivity at scale. That's the basic idea. So a block diagram of Anthos. So you can see that the execution nodes are the colored blocks all around and Anthos. It could be Google Cloud, the other public clouds, or on-premise and data centers and on the edge. And by the edge, whenever I say edge, I mean, you could just think of like a cache register that's sitting out there on the edge of the network that is able to run some code that's containerized. So that is also part of the ecosystem now that we are trying to tackle here. So The idea is to build once and then run that container on any of the other areas through a single control point, right? So you need less staff. You need staff who don't need to be skilled up in each one of the cloud's interfaces, and all of that rest of that work is handled by Anthos. So if you look at kind of the block diagram, Anthos is a Kubernetes-based platform, runs anywhere. So it is important to realize it's Kubernetes-based, so it runs containers only. um, it provides a control plane for centralized management. So if you look at the bottom layer, those are all the destination points that include Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, VMware, vSphere that's running on your prem is a target. And bare metal servers and any cluster, any Kubernetes cluster that's running anywhere on any cloud can be brought in to join Anthos. What you're going to get is application management, infrastructure automation, end-to-end observability, and compliance and governance, which is kind of a hard thing to solve in commercial entities, because you might be running HIPAA compliant or PCI compliant workloads. You need to be able to certify that those are possible. And then you also want to be able to apply a governance that's in your organization to all of these different entities running in different places. And you want to be able to govern that from a single pane of glass so that you have less headache in managing this entire network. So it's a big, tall order, but we are trying to solve it with Anthos. So if you look at it, if you look at the spectrum of applications and the way they are deployed on different platforms, in this case, I've just used components from Google Cloud. Sorry, on the left, we have Compute Engine. If you're not familiar with Google Cloud, on the left, we have Compute Engine, which is basically a virtual machine where you can get full control on every aspect of the infrastructure and the virtual machine. So you have complete control. In other words, a lot of work. You have to tune it exactly to the way you want it. But sometimes you want to do that because some applications need that, right? On the rightmost, you have cloud functions where you just write the code, and it's like a cloud function just runs that. You submit that cloud function into the cloud, and it will be triggered by an event, and it'll just execute. So you have very little control over the infrastructure in that. So in the middle, in the sweet spot, is a Kubernetes engine. And Cloud Run is essentially a Kubernetes engine service that runs your container. So it's a little less control in the sense that you just give it a container and it runs it for you. In the Kubernetes engine, you got to administer it. And then there's a point in between called GK Autopilot, which allows you to, which does some things automatically for your Kubernetes engine, so you don't have to be in there 24/7 hands-on to try to manage the Kubernetes engine. But that's the sweet spot that Anthos occupies, and basically it takes this and replicates around the cloud. So there are two types of executables that you can run on the Anthos system. One is just a container, and you can get some administrative control on it. Or you can also use Cloud Run on Anthos, which just runs a container with a little less administrative control, but that relieves you from having to manage the scaling and the security and the other aspects of it. So if you look at an application in the containerized GKE world, so you have the role of a developer who creates the application. It creates the business logic, keeps it as lightweight as possible, and keeps it portable, and creates the application which runs in a pod in the container, right? That's not the end of the story, though. There are all of these services that you need around it. You need automation, scalability, security, and control, observability, network resilience, and the policies for security, etc., to be applied to it. So typically, that is run in something called a sidecar. So sidecar just means that it's a container that runs along with the other container, and it gives it all of these features. So that sidecar is actually what we call the site reliability engineering. It gives all of those features are built into a site reliability engineering kind of a topic, and that area is actually the role of the platform admin. So the platform admin typically carries out that role, and that lower layer is taken up by Anthos config management and Anthos service mesh now. So the building block of the Anthos You get the developer experience. You can build, deploy, and run cloud-connected applications. You get the governance, security, and operations. And these are from different components. I'll just show you now in the next slide from which items they flow. And then you get the multi-cluster automation, and then the Kubernetes control plane that's controlling all of these clusters across all of these different environments. Now, if you look at it, it's possible to do your, I mean, I'm going to have a cloud focus on the application development itself, just as an example, but you can extend it over to your other IDEs, your favorite IDEs that work with whichever language you're interested in to create the container. So application development is supported. Management console is, there's a GUI-based console called the Google Cloud Console that allows you to use a visual technique to administer your networks. And there's also, if you're a command line person, there's command lines also available, your choice. Then under operations, we have cloud logging, monitoring, and cloud tracing. These are important aspects. So you want to be able to figure out which application crashed in which container in which location in your entire Anthos network, right? And you want to be able to pipe those logs to your centralized location so that you can also do some sort of a security analysis on it to see if anybody is trying to penetrate your network. Is there anything that's happening that's untoward? Or you could have simply have a transaction ID and you're trying to follow that through your network, try to see how is it flowing around. Right? And you can do your log analytics in order to look at that. And that's all handled by the operations aspect. Then there's a policy management. This is very important in the sense that you have the Anthos config management where you create the policies that policies are like, so for example, who has access to this application? You could create a policy and then that gets replicated across the entire network and then it's administered at every point in every container where that application is run. You don't have to physically go and say, oh yeah, container B here, this is a policy. That's actually done by the Anthos config management. And this service management is through Anthos Service Mesh. This is again a topic in itself. Actually, Google open sourced that called Istio. So if you're familiar with Istio, that's the same thing. It allows you to control the ingress policies, route the traffic, load balancers, etc., anything that is related to internet traffic reaching the containers and the pods. You can control that with Anthos Service Mesh. And then, of course, everything is got an API behind it that you can use the API to deal with it. That's how you get the command line function. And you can use curl, Python, your favorite technique in order to call that API and do what you need to do. And the deployment options haven't changed. So how does it do it? So looking at the architecture, you have the Anthos management layer running in the middle. On the left, on your workstation, you're either using a browser to click some buttons in the UI, the Google console, or you're using the gcloud command. There's a gcloud command that you can use in Google Cloud in order to do a lot of different administrative tasks, and that's one of the items. There's also Terraform. For those of you who are not familiar with Terraform, it's a way to automatically build up infrastructure in Google Cloud. So you can actually script up anything. It's called infrastructure as code also. So you can just script this up in a Terraform script and it'll bring things up. So that Terraform is another way by which you can operate on Anthos. And of course, your standard kubectl commands, right? kubectl command that you can use to operate on any cluster. Those connect to the API, the management layer. And then on the right, see that box, you see a connect agent. So that connect agent is the one that needs to live on whichever destination that you're trying to connect to, whether it's AWS, Azure, GCP, on-prem, on the edge. That connect server is responsible, connect agent is responsible for creating and killing clusters on that particular end of the Anthos segment. So that's the guy who's going to operate these things. So practically, when you fill that out, that looks like this. So in this case, we have Azure and AWS sitting out there, the control plane sitting there. It's going to create the instances. It's going to create the cluster in that endpoint and respond to the API request so that the control plane sitting on Google Cloud can actually control those instances out there. And their lifetimes will be controlled by the Anthos control plane. So Now, looking at some of us are developers here, so looking at the complete life cycle of how code will be developed. So the IDE, I'm picking an instance here. I'm just saying that, okay, in my case, I could use Google Cloud, or you could put Visual Slick Edit or whatever IntelliJ, whatever is your favorite IDE. But in this case, let's say I just pick Cloud, like a Vertex AI or something, create a container. I use Cloud Build to build that container. That container gets registered into the artifact registry. Artifact registry is like a nexus. It's a place where containers live. And then that container, when that container gets into the artifact registry, that's where all the scanning happens, security scanning to see that there is no exploits in that particular container or in the base image of that container, the base operating system image of that container. So once that is A-OK, you can use Cloud Deploy to deploy it into the runtime, which could be Anthos or Cloud Run or Kubernetes engine under Anthos. And then on the operation side of stuff, you can see that how cloud logging and monitoring, your standard Google Cloud logging and monitoring enhanced by Anthos to go across multi-clusters. You can look at the cloud logging in order to keep track of all of that. So let's see what Anthos gives you out of the box. So you get, of course, the rich support for homogeneous workloads. See this Kubernetes cluster not only supports Linux-based operating systems, but also Windows and also mainframes code. So it's got good rich support under there. I didn't know myself until I researched this, and you can actually build a Windows container and run it. And I'm a long time Linux guy, so never thought about it, but actually you can do it. So that's Kubernetes is under there. And then what you get on top of that is a single plane of glass that allows you to manage all of these different clusters that are sitting in any endpoint. I mean, you don't have to navigate to that. You can directly control it from here. You can control the entire lifecycle. And then you also have the option of using Cloud Run, which is basically allows you to do serverless anywhere. So in Cloud Run, the distinction is, please remember that you're just giving him the container to run. You don't care about the infrastructure. You don't care about how it's going to run it, but you just want it to run it either at scheduled times or scale at a certain way or whichever way you want to do it. So it has the added benefit of scaling to zero. That means when nobody is using any of the applications, you're not getting billed for it. It's just sitting there, right? And as soon as the first hit comes, it'll take some time to warm up. But then after that, it'll be very fast. But during that period, nobody was hitting it, no bill. So basically, I talked about Anthos config management. So Anthos config management is the multi-cluster management software that we have. So it's using a centralized Git repository to store all those policies that you're creating. That, let's say the policy is to give a certain AD group access to a certain set of applications. That policy would be stored in the Git. And then from that Git, it'll be applied to the entire ecosystem. Does that kind of make sense a little bit? Okay.
Is that policies code based on the open source products?
Yeah, it's based on the Google IAM identity and access methodology. So basically, it's based on the way Google identity is codified. So those policies are not directly editable. They would be based on whatever Google creates.
So is it based on any within standard, the policies code syntax?
Yes, YAML would be the way to do it. YAML?
Yeah, I was thinking of like more, YAML is like, yeah, that general language construct, but like policy definitions.
Yeah, I can get back to you on that. I don't know offhand, but I know that YAML is used under the covers and maybe JSON is also used. So it might be one of those two. So once this says, so yeah, we talked about replication of policies. The other is Anthos service mesh. In Dr. Singh's talk today, we heard about security, pervasive security that's going across everything, and this is one way to do it. So Anthos Service Mesh implements what's called zero trust networking. That means it creates a set of identifiers that is used both in the containers as well in the caller as well as callee. So it kind of keeps those certificates in sync so that you get the zero trust network. And then out of the box, it provides the service level objective monitoring that you need for the metrics, for the operational needs that you have identified. And of course, it provides the other stuff that you get from Istio, that's routing and load balancing, et cetera. And then you're able to get, application performance monitoring as well through the tracing. You get the latency analysis across distributed applications. You get a CPU and memory profiling and debugger. And then you also get the ability, this is important, to be able to run AI code that's been containerized across any part of your ecosystem. And why is this important, you might ask? The reason is that quite a few customers have their data split across several clouds and on-prem. So it is possible that you want a piece of code to analyze data that's sitting on, let's say, AWS and on-prem. So let's say you got out of 1 petabyte, you got 400 terabytes sitting on AWS and the rest is sitting on-prem, and then you want to be able to analyze that. Now, the first step would be, oh, let me bring all the data into one spot and then I'll analyze it. You don't need to do that. In this case, you would simply put up a cluster on AWS and a cluster on-prem, and you would take a piece of code, whether it's AI or whether it's a regular analytics code, and you would just ship it to those places and connect them to the local data. It analyzes that, and you aggregate the results later. So this is one way of approaching compute, where you don't move data around. You only move the code around and meet the data where it lives. So this a good feature to have. And then the other, the last item is that there is a healthy marketplace in Google Cloud. A marketplace is a concept where you can, a vendor or you yourself or a third party could create application that runs in Anthos, right? And then once you make it available in the marketplace, you click it and it gets installed and you can use it. So right now in the marketplace, for example, we have MongoDB, we have Elasticsearch. If you click on it, it just gets installed and then you can use it, right? And then you can use either the open source version or the licensed version, and you can also enter into, you can, if you have your own agreement, you can talk to Elastic and then get the appropriate rate reflected there, or you can also use the rate that they have advanced on the marketplace without having to do any negotiation, just use it for the duration you want it. So the idea is that, hey, I want Elastic for let's say 5 days. I'm going to install it. I'm going to get the full strength version, and after that, I delete it and I don't pay anything. So you only pay it during the duration during which you used it. So similarly, you would get these the software installed on Anthos and pay for the subset of time that you're using it. Another important aspect of Anthos is that I don't know if you guys know, but there is a way to take, there is a software-based capability within Google Cloud to take a virtual machine and convert it into a container to be able to run on GKE. And that same utility can be used to actually containerize the application, a VM-based application, move it around to any of the clouds or on-prem and put it on Anthos. It is also possible for those applications that need to actually run in a VM to be able to run on Anthos. So you don't just, you cannot, I mean, you don't have to just run containers. You can also run actual VMs on Anthos. So the possibility is to run any VM on VMware or AWS or Azure or Google's compute engine on Anthos.
Could I ask, how are is there anything in there to synchronize volumes across the clouds? So
storage?
Yeah, storage.
Yeah, I don't know offhand, but it should be possible too. But your question is like, for example, there is a data set, like a database or something that you would like your applications to process both in like let's say a master data set that you want to be available both on a public cloud as well as GCP,
Right.
and then you want to program. Yes, there are ways to do it,
Right.
but that doesn't use Anthos.
Yeah, so like looking at having, workloads refer to the same databases, like one would be one pattern, but what about like, Kubernetes persistent volume?
Yeah, it creates the persistent volumes to back this VM. So when you import that through that program, it creates the persistent volumes that you need to be able to give a similar look across the ecosystem.
So like a pod running on Azure and a pod running on AWS could refer to the same persistent
Yeah,
volume.
the same persistent volume, and that would be sort of in concept similar to a NAS, network attached storage.
Yeah.
Sort of similar to that conceptually.
And the other way is if you can get your data into block storage, you can connect from anywhere.
Right. So moving along, yeah, this is a program called MFIT that actually goes out and analyzes your virtual machines to give you a report on which ones can be easily moved and which ones will be harder to move. So you can prioritize them accordingly. It's a free program. It's available on Google Cloud.
What does that do? Analyze a VM?
Yeah, analyze there. So if you have vSphere or something, you'll go out and look at all the VMs in that installation, and it'll give you a report on which VMs are easy to containerize and move to either GKE or Anthos based on your needs. And then the ones that are harder to move, you can actually take a look at that and see why is it harder to move. Is it because of the base, the way the base OS is created or whatever, and then you can try to overcome that or modernize that app to something that can run on containers so that you get the benefits of containerization. So looking at the different ways to modernize with Anthos, there are, of course, a complete ecosystem of applications, but we can basically fit them into three broad categories. They are the modern ones, container-based, they run right away, no problem. There's a legacy VM-based one that you can use MFIT to bring them into Anthos. And then there's the third-party applications in the ecosystem that you can try to figure out if you can either put it into a virtual machine or put it into a container and then bring it into Anthos. And once it's there, it can run in any of the targets on the right. So basically, that's how you would modernize your application ecosystem. How much time do I have left? 3 minutes. Okay. So Anthos basically gives you the freedom to modernize without being locked into a specific cloud vendor or on-prem or any other item. And the base for moving around, the basic unit is container. So the magic word is if you can containerize it, you can move it around anywhere you want. Right. So I'll wrap up by talking about, reflecting on these 6 benefits of cloud Anthos. You can manage the applications anywhere, as we saw, from a single pane of glass. You can deliver software faster because the entire infrastructure is already existing. All you need is a container, and you can put it out there and configure it. You can get the right endpoints going. It's open. This API is described. The spec is available everywhere. The total cost of ownership is reduced because now you don't have to keep that much staff on hand that needs to understand each one of those platforms. You don't need to skill up on all of those things. You can use this one interface in order to keep everything going. Fewer people can keep the entire infrastructure going and also have it more secure. You can automate security because of the policies. You can bring analytics and AI services closer to your data. Like I said, that these these processing units can come right next to your data and actually do the job. So that's all in my talk. I am going to just show a little demo. These are my resources. These are resources that I'll distribute. They are like formal documents and video tubes. And we just concluded our next 22 conference where a lot of a track was on app modernization with Anthos. So you can see that just to mention that. And now I'll just show you a video that is going to talk about bringing Anthos on AWS. So I'm hoping the audio will be audible. Please help me with the volume if it is not. Where's my mouse here? All right, that's it, and that's on the talk show. I think I have to vacate the room for the next person who's coming up, but I'll take any questions, or I'll share my email, hmp@google.com. So if you have any questions, please do send by email, or if it's a short one, please do ask here. I think if you can send me a reminder on the policy thing.
Yeah, I looked it up. What I was thinking of was open policy agent and regular language.
Okay.
And those are kind of standardized languages.
If you can just shoot me an email, I'll check with the guys and send it back. Right.
Yeah, so
Yes,
I
sir.
was wondering how it's billing done with Anthos. Will you be billed by AWS or will you be billed by Anthos?
Yeah, so the billing is, I believe, centralized through Google. And so Google has an agreement, has a project in AWS where the Anthos infrastructure runs. And when you deploy these items, then that bill will be billed to your billing ID in GCP. So you get one bill.
Oh, okay. And is it going to be like if I was running the same infrastructure on AWS versus you Anthos to AWS, is it going to be the same with that extra charge for like the Anthos middle?
No, I believe it'll reflect the cost on that cloud. So if your container was if your program was going to cost a certain amount on Anthos and a certain amount on Google, it'll still keep those characteristics. It's not going to be like the Google charge will transfer over to AWS. So basically, your billing ID will be billed for the AWS resources at the rate at which AWS bills.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Harry. So if I'm running something on like EKS, and I have some stuff in GKE, we run like managed Anthos. We don't really run it, right? It's hosted by Google, like the control plane and whatnot, and we just run the sidecars.
Yeah.
Is that the same setup if Anthos was in EKS? You guys run the managed control plane
Yes.
inside their infrastructure?
Yes, the control agent is actually just a container.
Okay.
So,
So those don't run on your EKS cluster?
Yeah, it'll
It's
run
the
in
same
the
GCP.
same GCP.
Okay.
Right. Thank you so sorry, Vicky, you had a question?
Yeah, so there is the Anthos is using the Istio for the service mesh, right?
Actually, Istio is the open source version, but it's using Anthos Service Mesh is the official product.
It's called Anthos. Then the traffic director is also service mesh. That's also available on Google. What's the difference? What are we trying to do here?
I don't know. I don't know about traffic director, but
Okay.
I'll find out.
Yeah,
I'll let you know.
It looks like it's a similar product. And also, what's the next link is
This is what we just showed.
okay.
It's the video.
It's the video.
Okay.
And that's from Lisa Shen. She's the product manager of Anthos and Google Cloud.
Got it.
Yes,
Yeah,
sir.
so, when you look at this, there's a lot of different permutations that you could imagine.
Yeah.
Do people ever do something for any reason, like load balancing one application across multiple cloud providers? So like I hit an endpoint and it round robins across two different.
That's a pretty
cloud
interesting
providers.
perspective. Yeah, you could do that. What I do know is that people do international load balancing. So it's like Google has regions all over the world, right? So you could use Anthos to do international load balancing. And let's say that you hit upon a certain remote area where there is more Anthos AWS presence than Google presence, then you could choose to do that. I mean, nothing prevents you from doing it.
It seems like there's probably like some strange trade-offs.
Yeah, I mean,
You might
they're
not
always
wanna do
there.
that, but it's
Yeah, I mean, and they usually come from the policy side of things, right? For example, a country could say, "Hey, none of this data can leave my this area here. It has to be geofenced in here." So in that case, that's what you would do. You bring it into Anthos, make the containers only run in that area, and you could certify that the data is not leaving that geofenced area.
typically though, like one app would run on one cloud provider. Is that like the most common pattern that we've seen? So it's single pane of glass for maybe I have some stuff running on AWS and some stuff running on Azure, but this app runs on Azure, this app runs on.
No, we've seen a good mix. I mean, it's not, like one of the patterns I told you about is that the part of the data is sitting on some. People have been dabbling in cloud, so it's like part of the data is sitting in AWS, part of it is in Azure, part of it is in on-prem. So then they'll just take that single app and then replicate it all around, and then they'll work on where the data is.
Okay.
That's another pattern.
Yeah.
So like
Seems
I
like
think
it'd be a different endpoint though, maybe, or I don't know. Like again, there's a lot of strange.
yeah, you could use an external load balancer to actually have a uniform endpoint and then have some sort of logic in there that decides where that request should go, right? I mean, if it's customers from, let's say, Europe, they go to AWS in that
Right,
region.
okay. Yeah, does it, like, I was thinking about a load balancer for that. Does it use, when these requests come in, like, does it go to, I'm thinking of a traditional, maybe, the gateway, the Istio gateway.
Uh-huh. So yeah, I mean, in this specific case, the clusters have their own Istio gateway. So let's say there's a cluster in AWS, it has its own Istio gateway, and then there's a cluster on GCP, it has its own Istio gateway. But then on top of that, there's a global load balancer, which is using network endpoint groups, NEGs. So it's basically the packet is not going through the load balancer, it directly goes to the endpoints that are pointed to by the global load balancer. So it actually goes to the Istio gateway of that Kubernetes cluster directly.
Okay. So there's something sitting in
Yeah,
front of those Istio gateways, directing it to the right Istio gateway, but
Correct.
it's sort of like a smart pass.
Yeah, it's almost like DNS-based logic. Like it just gives you the IP address. Hey, that's where the gateway is. So then it just goes there without transacting through load balancer.
Okay, yeah, and it has to be out on the internet mostly, like the traffic.
No, all of this traffic is usually localized to the Google network. Google has a pretty large fiber optic network, so it stays within that network and exits the network at points where there's an interconnect to actually make a connection to the other cloud system or the on-prem or whatever. So something like an Equinix would host your interconnect, and high bandwidth interconnect like 10 gigabits or something. If it's less than that, then you would just use VPNs.
So that would be like sort of a network aspect that's sort of separate from Anthos about where that traffic, the path. That
you'd have to figure that out. Yeah. Good questions.
Yeah, and it also spoke about the centralized authentication using Microsoft Azure AD, but
Yeah, you can use a backing store as Microsoft AD as your as your identity provider, or you could use Google Identity.
So what the lady was using in the video to log into the EKS cluster, like how did that set?
There is a Google Identity can be configured to connect to any identification method. You know, it can use AD or Okta or whatever you pick. You know, Salesforce, and then Google Identity becomes a single point of reference for Anthos. So even though in the backend it's going to all of these different services, it's actually a uniform endpoint to be used so that our engineers have an easier time rather than try to figure out all the different combinations.
Actually, the next speaker is also talking about Anthos.
Yes.
It's from Deloitte, but that's a virtual one.
Oh, it's a virtual one. Sorry.
How that works?
Okay, what do I do next? Should I just get...
I'm not sure. Are we going to have some break?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I went over my time. How do I stop sharing?
The next one is a virtual one. So
well, I think I stopped.
to use that room or
did I stop? Okay, thank you so much.
Just wait a minute.
Yeah, I was wondering how that plays in that.
Yeah.
Huh? Thanks.
So like, you don't access certain maybe say higher object, you want to see higher object.
Right, and that's like incoming, it's just like outgoing.
Oh.
You make calls in the workload.
But you don't have to record us.
Oh, yeah.
That's my answer to this. So if there are any questions, please.
Hey, I'm not sure, facilitator, are you able to hear us?
Yes, but I can't see your screen.
Yeah, so do you want us to take a break, 5 minutes, or we should just start away?
Do you want to take a break? Let's start now.
I even got the Zoom links and that makes that I can open it up later.
Oh, the Zoom link. I will contact Siri and he will send you the. Okay, we can see your screen now. And just wait a minute.
Not sure, are you able to see the screen share?